Okay, welcome everyone to the Q&A portion of our fall virtual tours. My name is Lizzie Gray and I am a project coordinator for Connected Lane County. Today I am joined by two professionals from Emerald Broadband, a local internet service provider. Welcome you two. Would you like to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, Raymond Hardman, owner and CEO of Emerald Broadband. Pleasure to meet everybody.
Thanks, Raymond. Ben?
And I'm Ben Shapiro. I'm a systems engineer here at Emerald Broadband. Nice to see you all.
Awesome. So before we start, I want to remind everyone tuning in that you should have watched the pre-recorded tour of Emerald Broadband that Olivia, my coworker, sent out yesterday. I believe she sent it again in the reminder today. So if you have not watched that video, it's about 35 minutes long, so I might suggest watching it after the Q&A portion. But make sure that you do, because this is the accompanying Q&A. And as always, while our guests and I are chatting, we cannot hear or see you. However, you can interact with us through the chat feature. So if any questions come up while we're talking that you'd like to ask these two, please go ahead and type that into the chat box, because I will be monitoring it and I will make sure that your questions are answered. Alrighty, I'm gonna get us started. So Raymond, if you could start, and then Ben, we'll hop over to you. How did you wind up at Emerald Broadband? And obviously you're the owner and creator. So how did you come up with this company, and what was your path to starting this career?
Definitely. Well, I came up with Emerald Broadband due to the very apparent need for better internet connectivity, all the way from the residential aspect in our community to the corporate aspects in our community. How I ended up getting here is I have always been deeply interested in computer science and digital networking. Probably a little bit before I should have been interested in it. I was a very young, even a toddler that was had the ability to access computers, and it kind of stuck. And so throughout my life, I've been deeply focused on that, and have put a lot of interest and efforts into understanding not only what I was working on, but the whole depth of the field.
What kind of careers did you have before this job?
Well, I guess back in the beginning, I would have been called a systems administrator or operator. And that starts with a very small portion of the puzzle pieces that make up information technology and digital networking. From that, I grew and became a generalist in a lot of areas in the topic sector, and also understood business processes and organizational structures, as those tend to map to what the computers and the digital networks are doing, which are automating processes per se that normally would have been done more manually, from writing a letter and putting it in an envelope and putting a stamp on it. Now we use email. And so email was built around a lot of the human processes that the Postal Service leveraged. And so from there, basically continued gravitating to the point that I was consulting for many organizations so that I could understand not the technology side of it, but how the technology needed to be applied.
Very cool. And you said that you've been around computers since you were a toddler. Does that mean that somebody in your childhood home worked in technology or worked with computers?
Interestingly enough, I grew up on a small family farm per se. My parents were what would be considered blue collar. My dad was a machinist, and my mom actually worked airport security. I lucked out that in the early 80s, my grandparents, who were, my grandmother was a nurse and my grandfather was a doctor, they had seen these computers, Commodores at the time, and figured it would be a good investment. And so when I was 4.5 years old, I kind of dominated the gift from my grandparents, reluctantly from my brother and my parents. I was very addicted to it per se. I could see that I could do all sorts of things with it. And so I actually began writing BASIC, which is a earlier programming language, still used often, when I was about 4.5, 5 years old.
Holy smokes.
So I was reading Golden Books, if people are familiar with those. and I was reading Byte magazine and those, and then transcoding. So a lot of my English that I learned growing up, I learned it more from a computer book, which made things interesting for a little while.
That's awesome. I had no idea. That's cool. Thank you for sharing.
No worries. Thank you.
So Ben, you mentioned in the tour video that your path to this position with Emerald was not a straight line. Could you tell us a little bit about how you wound up here?
Yes, it was definitely not a straight line to work here at Emerald Broadband. You're right, Lizzie. My previous job to working here as a systems engineer was a winemaker. I was an assistant winemaker at a local winery, and I did that for about 3 years, and now pivoted into tech. But it all starts with the San Francisco Bay Area, I think. That's why I've got the background there. That's where I grew up. I grew up in Silicon Valley. I was around technology more by environment and diffusion than by interests. Like you couldn't really ignore it. So I started dabbling in tech there and followed my different hobbies. And I wound up studying geology in both college and in graduate school. I studied microbes and tried to simulate them with computers. But from there, I decided that I should make wine because microbes. But I've started to get more into computer networks and playing with networking equipment. And at some point, I decided I should try to do that professionally. And thankfully, I met Raymond, and we had a lot of opportunities to discuss a lot of technology and kind of bonded over that.
So did you feel well prepared when you made that career shift, or did you have to go take a crash course at U of O or LCC, or did you feel like you came into the job with the skill set that you needed?
I would say I was terrified, and everything was new for me. I was doing networking on a scale that was much larger than I had. It had just been like household type of setting up a router or switches to basically owning a part of the internet. So, but as far as classes and certifications, I didn't find those necessary because through higher education, both in tool sets I learned in college as a student and in grad school, allowed me to research, plan, implement, revise in anything I set out to do, whether it be configuring a data center level network switch or planning out a fiber optic build. Those skills I learned in those academic institutions translated very well. And it's the same skill set I used to learn winemaking.
Wow. Wow. I feel like from the surface, you wouldn't think that that would be the case, but I trust you when you say that. So Ben, how long have you been with Emerald Broadband?
I'm just coming up on 7 months, I think. Yeah.
7 months. Okay. So I feel like a lot of probably the hardest part of the learning curve you've
that is incorrect. As Raymond likes to put it, started out as a fire hose, and I'm in a river now with a life jacket, and that's about it. It's probably never going to stop. Definitely, it's never going to stop. I love learning, and I will find new projects to take on that I know nothing about, and that's okay. It's actually probably the better place to be because you actually get to learn how the process works that you're trying to implement, and not taking someone else's word for it. You really get to learn how that piece of technology works.
That's great. So I just heard you list 2 positives. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell everyone about what it's like working for Emerald? What keeps you there? What you love about the company?
I think the best thing that keeps me at Emerald Broadband is lighting up internet for rural communities and for students. the current environment we live in with a pandemic going on, and also the double whammy of distance learning going on during a pandemic, it's really exposed the lack of connectivity that we have in our county and state. And then to add a tragedy like a major wildfire on top of those challenges already just makes it really important to get internet out to people in rural communities. And it's been really fun coming up with innovative ways to make that happen, both in the McKenzie River, but in other parts of Lane County with fiber.
Yeah, that's great. Raymond, so you got to kind of create this company to be what you wanted it to be. So when thinking about Emerald Broadband's culture as a company, what were some of the like founding tenets that you wanted implemented at the company?
Definitely. So we actually, I had the opportunity of formulating as a public benefit company, which is kind of, they was often referred to as a benefit corporation as well. I could see the value and the potential profit aspect of a communications company that provided kind of what we've been hoping for to be better. But I could also see how the public aspect needs to be a priority over that profit. And so the focus is, as Ben mentions, is really about connecting the underserved or the unserved, as well as making sure that all the served even have the appropriate ability to really connect kids and the educational aspects so that there's a level playing field and the equal opportunity of what that connectivity can provide. I also hope that I can maintain a culture of opportunity and being more unique at looking at skill sets versus potentially experience. One of the things that is often forgotten is that a computer is only a tool, and it's a tool that automates processes, and those processes are typically done by experienced or trades groups to do a lot of that work, and then it's optimized so that some of the potential hazardous work can be done by robotics, or certain things can be sped up so that there's less of a delay between each of those manual tasks. And so we look to see where that actual inspiration, interest, and desire to do that soft skill per se can actually evolve the processes and the usage of technology to make it much more obtainable and much more adaptable to the actual usage of the actual solution set that it's being applied for. In our case, it's really about communication, human communications and connectivity. As we've seen, there is always good and bad in that, but with the lack of communications, with boundaries to communications, it creates silos and islands, and often causes us to either not be able to compete or to even survive in an environment. So really a culture of bringing down those doors, opening up connectivity, and helping all of the aspects that technology and digital networks touch become as best as they can be without any hindrances.
Yeah, that's great. Did I hear you correctly when you say that when you hire, you're looking for skill set versus experience?
Yes.
Skill set. So what do you look for when you hire? So what are some of those skills that you look for?
Recently we've been expanding some of our installers, and one of our new candidates that starts in a couple weeks.
Great.
He comes from setting up concerts, and so he does lighting at concerts, as well as moving equipment in and out and organizing that equipment, picking it up and putting it back. So those skill sets are all skills that we actually need optimized and highly efficient to do our jobs. And there's really no difference. Instead of running a electrical wire to power a light, we're running a fiber optic wire into the house using ties and stays, and climbing on objects safely and with consciousness of life at that. They're challenging tasks. And that he also has to then program those lights. And so programming those lights is using a computer and the software application of that. And so all of those skills, when shown to be brilliant in the aspect of a concert or a live stage or an event, have direct applicability to the things that we do. And it's really, I find that the key to even setting goals is identifying interest. I truly think interest is key to pretty much everything. If you're interested in something, it's not going to be hard to want to learn about it. You're going to naturally see things that are related to that.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Thank you. We have our first question here actually is from Ricardo, who teaches a business class, CTE, in Cottage Grove. And he's curious how large you would like the business to get, Raymond.
You know, as big as it's meaningful to the public benefit. We do like to dream of potentially being a national public internet option that makes affordable internet available to everybody, at least in our nation.
Sorry, couldn't unmute myself. That's great. That's great. So Ricardo teaches a business CTE class. Can you think of any other CTE classes? Are you aware of any others that might help a high school student prepare for a job in the tech industry?
Given kind of the skill set focus that we have, I couldn't say any of the CTEs wouldn't be valuable in pursuing a career in technology, or or even in an infrastructure portion of technology, such as an internet service provider.
Yeah, no, I love that approach, because I think that all CTE classes are valuable as well. And
I think
oh, go ahead.
I think the key is finding out of those CTEs. Even my recommendation is to go and maybe take a CTE that's completely unrelated to what you're doing, because that'll help you potentially see what interests you, so that interest can be applied to a full spectrum of things.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything outside, and this question can be for both of you, anything outside of school that you might suggest high schoolers do in order to get them career ready?
I should beat Ben to this one. It may be more technical to be more career ready, but there are things like becoming a ham radio operator. And that's the usage of amateur radio waves to communicate. The process of doing that, while maybe it's just clicking a button and understanding the appropriate terms to say to communicate across that, it taps into all aspects of science, but also includes the human interactivity around that science. And there's an ample group of volunteer individuals that actively try to encourage people to show up, and they'll teach them all the material, and they can go take the licensing test, and it opens up a whole new avenue, and as well as a lot of the meetup groups and stuff around certain characteristics of those. But I'll let Ben add to that, since I stole hand from him.
Well, on the volunteer or the amateur radio front, I've been licensed since I was 9 years old. It was a weekend thing that my dad and I did to get certified. I've leveraged that knowledge more than I could ever have imagined at Emerald Broadband for our fixed wireless service. It informs you about physics and how radio waves work. But it also teaches you how to communicate concisely. And that kind of ties into do an extracurricular that encourages soft skill development. That is more valuable in tech or any professional setting than specific skill sets. Those can always be learned, but the soft skills, like knowing how to communicate, knowing how to write, those are harder to develop and require you to step out of your comfort zone. So whether that's volunteering at a shelter or becoming volunteer for search and rescue, or gain a ham radio license. Those are all valuable skills. I can give you an example of that soft skill that's translated very well at Emerald. There was the CARES Act that got passed by Congress that put money up for infrastructure development, and the writing skills I learned in grad school for academic grants translated directly into us getting funding to build fiber for rural communities. That was not a CTE class that I took. That was not a tech skill I had gained. That was pure learning how to write for the sake of writing and demonstrating an argument to a reader.
Yeah. So written communication, what other professional skills? It looks like, Ben, you actually answered the question that just popped into the chat, but are there any others that stand out to you as professional skills that's are most important in your field of work?
Yeah, so for me, being an outsider coming into tech and pivoting, I was not an expert in anything technology related. The professional skills that let me function on a daily basis are being able to research and think logically and creatively. So if you are able to find primary sources, read them, and take away some major highlights or advantages or conclusions from that document or book you just read, that is invaluable. I use that on a daily basis, and it allows me to ebb and flow between all things tech, and I can become an expert in one thing if I really need to, but it allows me to pivot within tech itself. So I don't want to be light on the reading. You will have to read a lot, like a lot. Like I spend most of my day reading, believe it or not. Like the actual time I'm interacting with tech things is probably about 10% of my day.
Wow.
The other 90% is either reading or writing. Because everything I do has to be documented. Everything that I do, I have to read up on. So those are important skills to develop.
Wow.
And they translate across all industries, I think.
Yeah, I would agree. Raymond, anything to add? Any skills to add to that list?
I mean, those are definitely the key ones. As for me, now that I've got Ben, I'm doing a little less of the tech reading, and that gives me more time, unfortunately, to do a lot of the contract and administration reading. And that actually it is a key one. Being able to reading and reading comprehension is really key, because to keep going, you'll get thrown. For a internet service provider, we have to work with the FCC, and the FCC has quite a bit of forms that have to be filled out, and as well, it has ties into your taxes, and so you're going to actually have to read IRS tax codes and or be capable of reading enough so that you can communicate to your tax advisors and be able to understand that, maybe not at the depth of an expert, but you have to be able to read at a cursory level of the overview of it so that you can actually have that verbal dialogue or written dialogue with an expert so that you can piece it together. I think it all ties into critical thinking. I mean, critical thinking is definitely key, as you're going to have a lot of information, a lot of read information, as well as a lot of experts providing information. And you have to be critical on how that is applicable to what you're working on.
Got it. Okay, great. We have another question here from a student. What are some of the barriers to getting broadband out to rural communities? I grew up in Lorain and value the work you are doing so much. So this looks like a student from Lorain, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, definitely. So the biggest trick, so kind of the biggest challenge for Emerald has been exactly what it takes to get broadband out to any community, let alone a rural community. And that's where often we're finding ourselves now. We're tending to hire more from a construction perspective, because the gap in building out fiber is a high aptitude or high level of actual labor in actually putting the fiber in the ground. When doing the deep research into what's existent, the aspect of what's limiting our ability to be in rural areas is there is no medium to build off of. And when we're talking pricing of building that, it's often measured in per foot pricing. And so you've got to multiply everything out by at least 5,280 feet for a mile. And if you talk $5 for a mile or $5 per foot, the cost adds up. And so we, as an organization, we are deeply focused on building up our own ability to do that construction and also making that one of our most important portions of our company. You know, thinking's great, but if you can't do, you can think a lot of things, but still not end up with anything.
Do you have any plans to expand into Cottage Grove? Our Cottage Grove teacher would like to know.
So it's all about time and our success path. On the goal to get to the national public internet, our priority is to make sure that we can make Lane County our flagship county for that launching point. So we have easy ability to go north, south, and east, west from the Eugene area. We tend to, because of our rural focus and where we see that there has been a lack of infrastructure focus, we are prioritizing following the old highways per se. So we try to do that because there is some infrastructure down the main interstates. And in our approach, we need resiliency in that deployment. And so by following the old highways, it'll give us the opportunity to connect back and forth through those, creating a redundancy link. So ultimately, we don't want to just create yet another problem. We want to make sure that this will last for the foreseeable future.
Yeah, a long-term solution for sure. Ricardo would also like to know, where does your capital come from? Investors, sales, loans?
So we're self-funded. I have a business partner, a former employer of mine, for now definitely a friend now. He's been successful in his career. He now operates a farm in Hawaii. And so because of that relationship that I proved to him, he sees value and is our primary investor. And then because we're a public benefit, we redirect all of our revenue back into the community and into the further building of the network. As I mentioned, as we look around, there is maybe 2% of the fiber optic per se in the ground that's leverageable. So we've got a lot of work to do.
Wow. So say a student wanted to job shadow at Emerald Broadband. First of all, is that something that you all are open to? Let's pretend like COVID doesn't exist. And if it is something that you're open to, what kinds of jobs could they see, or what could they see you all doing on a daily basis besides reading, Ben?
So yes, we are open to job shadowing. Ben, why don't you take an approach of kind of the various functions we have today that would be job shadowable?
Okay, so there are kind of three wings to Emerald Broadband right now. There's the physical infrastructure. So we're building up fiber. We're placing fixed wireless where we can't get fiber yet. So there's that aspect. You want to gain construction skills, fiber splicing skills, antenna setup and pointing skills. That's the physical infrastructure wing. Then we have digital infrastructure, where we have servers hosting applications, setting up switches and connecting those switches and provisioning them, and the overall kind of detailed management of that system, performance monitoring, coming up with new resilient ways to kind of map out and plan our network. And then we have customer service side. Like, do you want to develop those soft skills, interact with people, help educate those who
Maybe you were speaking with Mandy?
honestly need to know more about technology and do want to help bridge that gap.
Okay, I can help you out. Sounds like she's on the phone.
Those are the wings I can see starting. But we are interested in the future to also kind of help leverage and collect data that benefits the overall community. And hopefully we can partner with organizations that help connect students to that kind of data also.
Very cool. I feel like we got to hear a little bit of the customer service happening in the background. Little
Yes.
real-time example. I like it. So we have a question from a Cottage Grove student, which I didn't realize Ricardo is asking some questions on behalf of his students. So those aren't all coming from him. But I love this question. How nature friendly are you as you dig in the ground and attach to existing infrastructure?
That's definitely a good one. So we actually focus on working in the right of ways where ultimately there's already existing utilities typically. In a lot of cases, as we're all aware of, there aren't underground utilities, they're on poles. And so it's less of a nature friendly other than our goal is to reduce the usage of utility poles and place underground. And it's actually more for a safety perspective. Those telephone poles kind of sometimes get in the way of automobiles and such when errors occur per se. But our focus is to, ultimately with fiber optic, it will, as studies have showed, can help reduce the necessary aspect of travel and burning of fossil fuels to accomplish tasks that can be done digitally. We follow all the EPA guidelines, definitely for our wetland areas. There's definitely a lot of checks and balances that we have to follow. And because of our goal to have the forever network or the future-proof network, we try to make sure that we do the extra 10% above what's asked so that as things do change and we find out more aspects of how better we can handle and treat and work in our environment, we want to be ahead of it. There's no fun going back and having to redo things, and it's extremely costly when you could actually, potentially have to spend a little bit more upfront to do it right.
Yep, that sounds about right to me. So I've got a couple animals surrounding my feet. So another question from the Cottage Grove class is how do you compete with large corporations or equally sized businesses? Which I feel like we got to a little bit in the video, but it's possible that one of you could expand on that.
Yeah, Ben, would you like to expand on how it's been going?
Sure. So it's been kind of fun to come into Emerald Broadband and to kind of see how we operate versus how I think larger corporations try to do the same job. I think we're focused on building, and by us doing as much as the building as we can and making the system as simple as it needs to be, engineering wise, we really reduce the overhead on maintaining the network. And we also kind of keep the level of infrastructure we have to invest in down at a lower level. And some of that strategy comes into play amid this pandemic that we're experiencing. Supply chains have been really interesting for internet service providers, especially with the kind of more technical networking equipment that you'd have to bring in. A lot of it's made overseas, and shipment lines were kind of interrupted. So when we were starting our fiber build, we were asking ourselves, okay, what is the appropriate device we can put in that we can actually get our hands on so we can start installing fiber optic to homes? That turned out to be data center switches that were put in data centers about 10 years ago, and we're kind of at their end of life for the data center. They are extremely fast for a residential network. So by not picking the in fashion corporate kind of core network switch, we went and used something that was a little bit older, but for a different use case where it was perfectly adequate. which leads to cost savings and just an awesome service. So by constantly asking ourselves the question of how can we make service cheaper and faster and more reliable, we really will win every single time.
Yeah, absolutely. I remember when we were on the tour, you mentioning that your all's upfront cost might be a little bit more expensive than, say, some of the larger companies, but that over time, or maybe your monthly cost, I can't remember exactly, but that you are like you have a highly compatible or highly competitive rates after that upfront cost.
Yeah, so we're kind of building for the long term, because when you're not on like a 3-year or 5-year cycle of putting infrastructure in, you can actually invest in lasting infrastructure. They'll provide a great service. So instead of splicing everyone into the same fiber, which is a technology called GPON, which has been a lot of the fiber to the premises, we opted to do dedicated fiber optic cables to each household. For the most part, those won't need to be replaced ever in the future. They could be there for 50 years potentially. And then you just swap out the light generating devices on either side.
And one of the other aspects that's key to that one is in 95 to 98% of all the residential builds in Oregon, there is no fiber optic that goes to the actual home itself. And you're quite lucky if there's actually a capacity of fiber optic that actually runs across the street. And so from an initial price competitiveness aspect, if it's a traditional competitor such as a telephone company or a cable company, where there's already ancient infrastructure that exists that's only capable of a certain capability, it has to be replaced. So when initial cost is compared to that, we tend to be somewhat more expensive. In a lot of cases, not that much more expensive. But when you're looking at a potential competitor that's deploying fiber, we tend to try to tie that initial build so that we can discount that since we've already got the labor out there more significantly. When compared to after the fact, when the backbone has been built, our price tends to be in line, if not somewhat better at times, to a competitive fiber install. But it actually is fiber that goes to your house. If you're using a coax, if there's coax that goes into your house and your modem connects into a coax, it's not fiber to your home. It's actually fiber to the node, if that's the terminology being used. It's unfortunately, the large competitors have not done a very good job of not misleading customers.
So that was actually going to be my next question. I would say personally, there's a huge lack of trust and lack of transparency with some of those larger companies. And so I would much prefer to use a local company, but can you speak about how important transparency is for you when it comes to working with your customers and how you build trust?
I personally, and I believe the team shares this with me, it's extremely important. Where it can be cumbersome to us is that because of a lot of that misinformation or lack of information, it can be quite challenging to kind of find out where the truth knowledge they have is, so that we can work from that. And since with technology, there's definitely a million different ways of doing some things. And so really kind of illustrating that there's differences, and those differences may seem similar, but there are differences, and they all have pros and cons.
Okay. Ben, were you going to add anything?
Oh yeah. Some of you out there may have used open source software. I'm a fan of open source software. We use open source software. We think of ourselves as like the open source internet service provider. If you ask questions, we will, or at least I know I will answer, and depending on how much detail you can actually like handle, I will answer all your questions. And the kind of cool thing that we want to foster is that everyone who's interfacing with customers actually physically knows what the infrastructure looks like and knows what the technology is. So they can just have a really direct, transparent conversation. And we want to be as open as possible. And if the customer wants to know exactly what the topology of the network is to their house, I will let them know that, because we know that. There's no reason why we shouldn't share that. It's not like it's privileged information. It's what exists. And you can probably figure out, if you're like me, what the topology of your network is.
Yeah. Very cool. That, in my opinion, that sets you guys far apart from any competition. Question here, how does the light technology work? And how did you figure out using that?
Oh boy. Well,
Lasers.
yeah, lasers. For me, it was a natural progression in the technical field in the mid to early 90s, where we moved from electrical-based solutions, basically telephone wire, for lack of better medium. They're commonly referred to as like T1 lines or T3 lines or DS3 lines. Then they moved into what was called optical carriers, which was the initial fiber optic methods. That technology has matured extremely fast in the late 90s and early 2000s. And so for me, the fiber optic light that we're using is the same technology and techniques used to light up the large organization data centers, campuses. It's the same technology that I use to hook up 218 offices worldwide on a dark fiber network with 81 data centers. And so it's we actually chose to not reinvent the wheel at all. The largest consumers of these optics are major corporations, which keep the prices actually low. And they also have to abide by making sure that that technology has more than a 3 to 5 year life cycle, whereas a lot of our competitors are using commercial consumer grade type of solutions that are not built on a financial model for more than a 2-year life cycle. Our goal is to not have to replace our main physical plant or our outside plant per se. The design that we're actually leveraging overlaps with the traditional telco model per se, where we have direct lines from customers back to our distribution points. So it gives us that flexibility. It's not necessarily affordable today, but our network is capable of providing 400 gig connections to homes.
I don't know if you see the follow-up question in there, but there's another question that says, what exactly is Wi-Fi then?
Yeah, so often when we hear Wi-Fi, we would classify that more as the Wi-Fi that you would have, that you'd access from your phone at your home or on your computer, your laptop. And you type in the SSID, or you find the SSID, and you then have network connectivity. So that's that portion of Wi-Fi. What we would potentially call Wi-Fi, or as from an internet service provider backhaul perspective, is fixed wireless. And so that medium is where we feed radio transceivers, fiber optically fed, and then they take that and turn it into radio waves so that we can avoid having a construction build and then plan those out. But so our goal with our fixed wireless is it gives us the ability to quickly launch a better solution in an area, and then build the fiber optic, since those are usually 20, 30, 40, or in some cases 100-mile builds. And so with fixed wireless, it's there's the aspect of bringing up individual premises, which is considered a point to multi-point deployment. So you've got one access point, and you have many stations or many homes or premises. And then there's also the point-to-point is where we are able to create similar fiber optic middle and long haul connections, and then beam it through towers over the mountaintops, so that we can then also provide service to other areas, but also have a backup to if for some reason there's a terrestrial impact, both natural or unnatural, to that fiber optic. Hope that wasn't
No.
too much and was more towards what that question was for.
Yeah, no, that was great. I'm just going to throw out an all call for any last student questions. I have one more question here ready for these two, but if you have anything that you would like to ask, please go ahead and type it into the chat box now, because we are just about to wrap
These have
up.
been really great questions.
Yeah, right. I completely agree. So my last question for you all while folks type is, have you reflected at all on anything since our time filming? Was there anything that you found yourself thinking about later that day or at night that you didn't mention or you wish you had the opportunity to mention?
For me, it was more about being able to show kind of the various diversity of sites that we have. I think we had a good show of the fiber optic aspect, but as the question about Wi-Fi, the fixed wireless is a different medium, and there are different things that we have to do for it, even though they significantly overlap with the more physical wired medium.
Got it.
How about you, Ben?
Yeah, Ben.
Oh, there's
anything?
just not enough time to talk about all the projects that we're working on here. So that was kind of a vignette of one aspect of Emerald Broadband. But of course, recently, since that video was shot, we had the Holiday Farm fire tragedy out in the Mackenzie Bridge area. All the fiber and cable internet that was run out there came out of Eugene, and all 22 miles of it burned up. So there is no internet connectivity out there. There have been some cells on wheels that connect via satellite out there, and FEMA deployed some satellite connections, but that's probably not that much bandwidth. It's satellite, you can usually get about 10 megabits per second through there, which is barely anything. So Emerald Broadband, with a group of IT professionals from Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, came together, and we built a microwave backhaul in the last 5 weeks from Bend to Hoodoo to 2 eWeb towers on reservoirs into the valley. And we set up a solar tower on top of Castle Rock, which is kind of on the south ridge of the Mackenzie Valley. And it's completely solar, and it's feeding the high school and all the major community centers with Wi-Fi. We saw a graph this morning of the usage that went through yesterday on that network, and it was over 80 megabits per second. So we were delivering 8 times satellite connectivity effectively. So that's been a fun way to leverage our knowledge, and just one of the many projects that we decided to do for the benefit of the community.
Very, very cool. Well, I don't see any more student questions. I do, however, see a note that says, please come to Cottage Grove. So I'll leave you two with that note. I know you guys are going to work hard on it. So go ahead.
We may have been talking about that in the last couple months. So definitely not off of our radar.
Okay, good to know. Well, thank you both so much for being here and for making time this summer to film that video. We greatly appreciate your insight.
Definitely. Thank you for the involvement. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us.
All righty, everybody. Tune in tomorrow for our Working Wednesday webinar on communication, and then next Tuesday for our Q&A with Oregon Pacific Bank. All righty, everybody. Have a good day. Bye.